Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Skilled Fawn, and today we are going to be doing a Lords of the Fallen challenge run. Let's waste no time and get straight into the rules. Starting off, we can only use daggers. There are plenty of daggers to choose from in Lords of the Fallen, and even some in the starting classes. Next, we must beat the game. Subsequently, there will be additional modifiers active within the run. Increase enemies. Lords of the Fallen got patched many times throughout its life cycle. One thing that got hit was the enemy numbers. Turning on this modifier will make the game seem like it was pre-nerf. Withered Healing. Health in Lords of the Fallen is given in two ways, normal and withered. Withered Healing technically means that I have been healed, but if I get hit again, I will lose all of that health. I'll talk about this more throughout the run. Randomized Loot. Important items such as story-driven or questline items will be in the same place. Other than that, items will be randomized. Vestiges are fewer within the world. Vestiges are the equivalent to bonfires or graces in the Souls games. Having fewer of them will be interesting. Lastly, glitches and or exploits are allowed, so expect some cheeky ways to take down bosses and get around areas. This is the first Lords of the Fallen challenge run on the channel, and so I'm excited to share this with everyone. I previously played through Lords of the Fallen and made a first time review for those who are interested. Let me know down below if you'd like to see more Lords of the Fallen content in the future. Make sure to smash the like button, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Without further ado, let's get into the run. We start the journey by selecting our class. I went with the Exiled Stalker since it has not one but two daggers. It also helps that we get a lacerating knife secondary. This was something I was on the fence on. It is technically a dagger, but because it wasn't a primary weapon, I felt I shouldn't use it. Let me know down below your thoughts. Running through the starting area, I refamiliarized myself with the game's mechanics and have some fun taking the enemies down. The first boss on our journey is Pieta, she a blessed renewal. I have to say her cutscene goes super hard. Pieta inflicts the smite status effect, which when built up will deal a massive amount of damage to the player's health bar. She has a lot of slow attacks, which actually help me to parry and dodge her attacks. Because we're using daggers, this lets me get a ton of quick slashes in. After attacking, since I'm not in animation as long, compared to like a colossal greatsword, I can dodge or parry when needed. When her health bar reaches halfway, she will transform and will now have the ability to summon clones of herself. Majority of the clone attacks are easy to dodge. There were a few that were fairly tough to avoid. Ultimately, we take her down. Below Pieta's boss fight, we find Skyrest Bridge, a sanctuary. Here, NPCs can be found having different roles. Pieta, the boss that we just fought, will be in the sanctuary, and talking with her, we can upgrade our healing flask. Malu, who can be found in Umbral, which I will talk about Umbral a lot more shortly, will sell more precious items. It can also be used to equip eye socket slots, which are the equivalent to great runes in Elden Ring, though the eye sockets have much less power attached to them. There are other NPCs that can be talked with to upgrade weapons or buy items. The last thing I will mention about this area is that I really enjoy the atmosphere here. From the architecture to the music playing, I found myself enjoying coming back here. Progressing out of the sanctuary, we enter Pilgrim's Perch. One of the things I like about Lords of the Fallen is the maps. This gives the player a general route of where to go, usually in 4 to 5 steps. There's a lot that the map doesn't show, but is definitely helpful nonetheless. Next up, we got another boss fight, this time with Scourge Sister. This is a classic example of the game throwing a normal endgame enemy into the early game as a boss. Another example of this is Taurus Demon in DS1. Super early game, you fight one on a bridge, but then before Bed of Chaos, there's just a ton of them. This fight, I tried to parry it as often as possible because I found getting slashes in was really tough. It was mostly because she will just kick the player, which cancels their attacks. Sooner or later, we take her down, and nearby we find some loot. Well, we get this really good early game ring. This ring will let us heal continuously, which is a worthwhile bonus, especially early on. Let's talk about the Umbral Realm for those in need of a refresher or are new to the game. Essentially, there are two worlds, the normal and Umbral realms. When the player is in the quote-unquote normal realm, the world state is unchanged. When in Umbral, this changes the world in many ways. First is that different enemies will attack the player. These Umbral creatures come in many different forms. Make sure to be careful. Next, the player can find memories around the various maps. These act to help the player understand the lore and also give them material for boss weapons, armor, and other things. Found some of these to be quite sad, but also memorable, especially where the two people are in cages upside down. Subsequently, the player can find special loot that is only dropped in the Umbral realm. There are various idols that when soul flayed can be looted. Unfortunately though, there is usually a super tough enemy or mini boss that guards them, so yeah, it can be a bit tough. Lastly, the player will find it difficult to navigate the Umbral realm. There are enemies that troll the player into picking up their loot to Reaper that follows the player when they're in Umbral for too long. There's a lot more that I could cover and talk about right now, but I want to get the basic premise across. Expect me to talk about this more in the video. Going through the game, we eventually find a blacksmith and free her from the cage. Now we will be able to upgrade our weapon stats. There are two ways to upgrade: using upgrade materials to get it from +0 to +10. Another option is using gems. This is very similar to Bloodborne's gem system, where you can equip gems and they have different stats to them. Next, we gotta fight the Congregator of Flesh, this disgusting creature at the bottom of a pit. This boss inflicts the poison sass effect, which can be tough, especially with Withered Healing. Either way, it didn't matter since we beat this boss on the first try. Later in the zone, before the first beacon, I was taking down some enemies and looting them. Well, I ended up getting this really good dagger. This dagger inflicts the poison sass effect, which is really useful. I'll talk a lot more about this dagger and my build later on. One thing I really like about this game, compared to the mainline Souls games, is upgrading the healing flask. An example I will use is Dark Souls 3. The player goes around the world and collects the upgrade materials, then back in the shrine burns an undead bone shard. Fair enough. It's basically the same thing as Lords of the Fallen. The difference being that you talk with Pieta and she does this crazy prayer sequence. At least for me, I really enjoyed it. Sekiro has a similar approach with Emma, which I enjoyed as well, but found Lords of the Fallen's healing upgrade to be much more epic. Getting to the first beacon, we have to fight a boss first. The Hushed Saint starts on horseback, and over time will ditch the horse to fight himself. This is one epic fight, and it felt super awesome to dodge his attacks. Daggers so far seem to be a solid weapon to use in this game, compared to the other Souls games, but we still have a far distance to go. The upside to daggers is their fast attack speed, alongside status effect buildup. Then the downside is the limited damage I can inflict at once. Let me know down below, do you think daggers are a solid choice, or do you think they are some of the worst weapons in the game? After taking down the Hushed Saint, we cleanse the first beacon. There are 5 beacons in total, so we definitely have some progressing to do. This clip perfectly shows the additional enemies modifier, and how fun yet challenging it can be, especially while in Umbral. I found myself fighting more than 10 plus enemies where they just kept on spawning over and over. One of the funniest yet most terrifying bosses to fight is Spurn Progeny. The cutscene is hilarious until it shows the boss opening its mouth. It was super satisfying to dodge its attacks, especially the AoE ones. This fight did take a couple of tries since I got too aggressive in my first attempt and got utterly destroyed. Ultimately, we take down another Remembrance boss. Progressing towards the cistern, we end up looting a second poison dagger. This will be really nice. Further in the level, we find an umbral flower bed. These can be found throughout the game. Here, the player can plant vestige seeds and make a mini bonfire essentially. This is something I'm kind of on the fence on. I really like the concept of vestige seeds, but at times seems abundant like DS2 with all the resting points. In the cistern, we find 2 bosses. First is Skin Stealer. These enemy types can be tricky since they have 4 weapons. By this point, we have upgraded both of our poison daggers to a decent level, and also got a worthwhile ring. Essentially, whenever I poison proc an enemy, it will also build up the bleed sass effect. Bleed in this game is very different to the other Souls games. To explain, when the bleed meter is built up, the player can damage the boss to get increased damage per hit. Because we're using daggers, this is really good. The dagger's quick attacks will let me get a ton of damage in. I did end up changing my build throughout the run, but found this to be the most effective. Poison could be changed for a different sass effect, but with some bosses where they get wither healed, it is really worthwhile to cancel it out. The second boss, well, the player needs to do some platforming to get to their arena. The environment here is terrifyingly awesome. I did die a few times to my old friend Gravity, but third time's the charm. Here we get a trio boss fight, and I was actually surprised by how well things went, all things considered. This is my second playthrough of the game. Well, in my first, I died at least 10 plus times to this boss. That's an understatement. I found it tough to manage 3 enemies that can lunge and track the player with precision. While having some more knowledge than my first playthrough, alongside having good armor and weapons help. I found pairing to be the best, since I would get a ton of damage in such a short amount of time. Ultimately, the Bringer trio don't stand a chance. I get yeeted to my death. This next area I found myself liking a lot, even though it's quite challenging. There are tons of invisible sniper enemies among this bell-headed dude that just has this weird but cool area of effect attack. Afterwards, at the base of the area, we find a 2-phase boss fight. The fight starts off with the bosses separate. The knight will use her bow alongside a massive colossal sword. Later, when the knight is defeated, the other boss will join together, becoming the Unbroken Promise. This is one of the cooler fights in the game, but one thing I would recommend is using a poison weapon in this fight. During the fight, the boss will continually heal. Having poison damage to counter it works wonders. I decided to fight this boss more so like a Dark Souls enemy compared to Sekiro. I found pairing the second phase to be pretty tough, especially with her various claw attacks. Sooner or later, we take her down. Because we conquered the cistern, we are able to go up towards Upper Cowrie Calrath, here we find another beacon to cleanse. Heading into Fief, we find it to be a frozen wasteland with unsightly creatures roaming about. I did have some trouble with 2 of the mini bosses in this area. Both of them inflict the Frost Sass effect. And have a bunch of enemies roaming the area. Frost is different to many of the other Soulsborne games, and in this game it limits the player's stamina bar to half, which can be tough to deal with. Thankfully, since we were using daggers, they consume much less stamina compared to other weapons. The Hollowed Crow, oh my gosh, what a fight. This was a really tough boss to overcome. I mentioned in the previous bosses that there were a ton of enemies roaming around the arena. Well, in this fight, there are a lot more and they respawn. The thing that is most frustrating is that since I Wither Heal, I am rarely at full health, especially in this fight, because of the constant bombardment of attacks. Another tough aspect is that each phase of this fight has different enemies, some with projectiles and others having aggressive attack combos. This meant I had to watch out for the various enemies on top of then attacking the boss. After a lot of pain and suffering, daggers proved their worth, getting me the win. At the end of the level, we find the 3rd beacon and cleanse it. Now we are over halfway through the game. Coming across another Light Reaper fight, I was interested and determined to take him down here if possible. I say that because this boss isn't supposed to be fought until much later, basically before the final area. I focused up, leaning out from my chair, gamer posture, ready to take him down. Well, things worked out surprisingly really well, and I think this is a perfect example of daggers' up and downsides. Since we started incorporating bleed into our build, we have been able to get massive damage on enemies and bosses, but is most useful with bosses that have a large health pool. Sass effects can be built up tremendously easier compared to other weapons. On the other hand, damage is minimal and many bosses are so aggressive where I can only get 1 to 2 hits in, so daggers are suboptimal there. We still do have a fair amount of the game to go, so things could possibly change. Eventually, Light Reaper gets taken down and I was super hyped to know I could take him down right here and now. Next, I found a boss I didn't come across in my first playthrough, so I was both terrified yet excited. This reminds me a lot of Lothric and Lorien from DS3. Instead of Lothric only being able to revive, both of the defenders are able to. Essentially, I had to time my attacks and make sure to get them both to low health before defeating one. I did have some trouble with this fight, and it actually took more than 5 tries. Close by to the defender's boss fight and towards the Tower Penance, we found another boss. This showed a great weakness in my build, which is that when enemies are poison resistant, my build can't get its high damage in. Though late in the fight, I did poison and bleed proc him, so things worked out. We can progress towards the Tower Penance. I was really excited to fight one of my favorite bosses in a different upcoming area. Entering the Abbey of Hallowed Sisters, we have an extremely tough time navigating the enemies. Further in the Abbey, a short cutscene plays. This shows our character collecting the rune of a deer, followed by an enemy dropping in. Besides collecting the rune, there wasn't anything else noteworthy, so let's move on. Progressing through the cathedral, we find more defender enemies. When I came here, I realized, ooh, I have fought these guys before, but not the boss fight with them up until now. One of, if not my favorite fights in this game, is Judge Cleric, the Radiant Sentinel. From her attacks to her insanely cool design, I gotta say, it is such a fun fight. She inflicts the Smite Sass effect, which when built up deals a ton of damage to the player. A few noteworthy attacks is when she covers the ground in arrows and does this massive area of effect slam down attack. When we take her down, another cutscene plays, showing that she was showing us an illusion not only of the area, but also herself. She's actually this wicked and horrifying person. Using a lot of similar attacks to her first phase, and infusing them with Hellfire, she makes for a hectic fight. It should be noted that they are enhanced variations where the attack combos are much quicker. Ultimately, Judge Cleric didn't stand a chance. Behind her arena is another beacon to cleanse. Going back to the Tower of Penance, we do a bunch of platforming to make our way to the lowest levels. At the lowest level of the tower, we come across Tancred, and this is another awesome boss fight. The first phase is similar to the Hushed Saint, boss fight before the first beacon, and it's super fun to parry his attacks. His second phase is where things get quite insane. He stabs himself with the spear, and his other half takes control of his body. Seeing the body twist and contort like that is just terrifying and something I would expect out of Bloodborne. My game plan was to focus on his backside leg, hopefully stagger him and avoid his front side. Thankfully things worked out and we take him down. Wait, what's going on? I'm stuck! Someone please help! Anyways, we progress to the top of the tower and cleanse the final beacon. Now we are in the last stretch of the game. The player needs to head towards Upper Calrath in order to progress. Well, the nearby vestige was blocked, so I had to do a lot of running. A lot. It did feel feel nice to pass by Light Reaper's arena knowing I took him down much earlier. Entering Brahma's castle, we find lots of enemies inflicting fire-related sass effects. Before going too far into the castle, I want to max out our weapon's upgrade level alongside putting the best gems on. I opted to increase the agility scaling, dexterity in other games, to maximize the base damage as much as possible. Further into Brahma's castle, we have to soulflay an enemy that is blocking the path. Oh, there was at least like 20 enemies on my tail. Needless to say, yeah, the modifier is definitely working. At the end, we find the Sundered Monarch. At first, this fight is a bit laughable. Once that cutscene plays and he rips off the statue's head, things get insanely tough. This boss has a bunch of area of effect moves, make sure to figure out their timings. The phase 2 transition where he explodes to then slam onto the ground is super dang cool. Daggers once again prove their worth and we take him down. The final boss in the game is Adir, the Bereft Exile. This fight, I would have to say, is similar to King Allant and Demon Souls, whereas more so a lore boss rather than a fight-intensive experience. One thing is that in Adir's fight, there's a bit more trouble with the various enemies roaming around, though they're really not that tough. Essentially, the player needs to go around and defeat each of the enemies that are ignited. When taken down, this will deal damage to Adir's health bar. When we take down the last enemy, we walk up to Adir and a cutscene plays. We defeat Adir using the lamp. This just goes to show the power of the Umbral Lamp. The final cutscene is playing. Let's reflect on the run. This was Lords of the Fallen with daggers only. We beat the game and also had additional modifiers active. I found that daggers were valuable weapons in the game compared to some of the other Souls titles. Now, how effective were they? Well, pretty damn effective. Using various sass effects in synergy showed how powerful a tool daggers can be in your arsenal. Now, I want to quickly talk about a few things. First is that I'm curious to know your thoughts on this run. Do you want more Lords of the Fallen content? Should I not use Vestige seeds in my runs, etc.? I'm really curious to hear. Second is that over the past few challenge run videos, I've had some people comment on some audio issues, and I hope this video will be the first to address that. I've gone ahead and done some research alongside doing some tweaking. Let me know if you notice a difference and whether it sounds better or worse. I always want to become better at what I do, and so I'm thankful to those who commented helpful feedback. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Try to do something kind for someone today, whether it's a small or large gesture. This is your boy Skilled Fawn, and I'm out.